everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Yes, I am still dealing with a cold. I still have a sore throat, so if I sound weird or if I stumble over my words in this video, that is probably why. However, I have been holding in this rant for literal months now at this point, so if I don't get it out there, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. So we're just going to deal with it. We're dealing with the sore throat because I have to talk about this. I really want to talk about enthusiastic consent. I believe I last covered this in the video I did on the Fry's model of consent and some of the issues I had with the framing around enthusiastic consent, and I want to kind of revisit it in more detail because though this is a rant, I want to do it in kind of a structured way. So I want to talk about the history behind this term, how we actually arrived at the terminology of enthusiastic consent, my thoughts about it, my opinions about it, why I think there might be some issues with this term. And then of course, I also want to discuss some alternatives, some different framing or phrasing that we could use instead of enthusiastic consent to maybe think about this in a more realistic, more holistic way. And I think right off the bat here, I should probably state that I am not against the concept of consent or consent culture. I personally am a very consent-minded person. Consent and communication are like the two things on my channel that I talk about the most compared to anything. It always comes back to those two things. I think consent is super important. I think it is foundational to any experience, whether that be BDSM or vanilla sex or somewhere in between, right? Consent has to be the first thing. I just personally take issue with the phrase enthusiastic consent and what that idea represents. So that is what I want to break down here. I hope that if you're seeing this channel for the first time, if you don't know who I am, I'm not kind of like some kind of person who's like, oh, consent culture is being used to like take people down or some sort of conspiracy theory. No, I don't believe that at all. I just want to talk about this particular version of thinking about consent. And I actually found a really great article I want to start off with here that does a good job of breaking down the history of how we got to the phrase enthusiastic consent, which I will read from now. We started with no means no, which ran into legal and social problems quickly because people are not always in a state to say no. Due to a culture of not talking about sex, women, who are also more often than not the victims of sexual assault and rape, are also not taught how to say no. They are also taught to make men comfortable, to not offend them and to stroke their ego, lest to be awkward or the other person retaliates at rejection. So we moved on to a yes means yes model of consent, which has its own flaws. People who are too drunk or high might say yes to sex without being in complete control of their agency. People might be coerced or pressured into saying yes. And a yes to one act doesn't mean a yes to every other sexual act. Clearly, we needed something more. Enter enthusiastic consent. It is an unequivocal, engaged, excited yes to an offer of sexual activity. It is not just passive agreement. It shows the consenting individual actively desires the other person. Enthusiastic consent removes all of the awkwardness and fear of uncertainty and replaces it with an unmistakable hotness of getting and giving a hell yes. It's a whole body experience that involves paying attention to one partner and checking in with their physical and emotional cues. Enthusiastic consent requires communication, either verbal or physical or both. It can include nodding, making eye contact, smiling, looking relaxed and excited, kissing and touching the other person back, breathing heavily, moaning, and just outrightly saying one likes what is being done to them with statements like, don't stop, or that feels so good. Enthusiastic consent does not include, even if there exists a yes, signs like silence, stiff body language, or the absence of reciprocal touch, or a yes from a person under pressure, inebriation, or another vulnerable state. And I can certainly see why we arrived at the term enthusiastic consent, because no means no has limitations. Yes means yes has limitations. Enthusiastic consent also has limitations. Where I think enthusiastic consent makes the most sense is with new partners that don't know each other that well. And that is the thing that I see left out of this conversation when it comes to consent is how do you handle it when it's somebody that you know really, really well, somebody that you're in a consensual power exchange relationship with. You know, those sorts of things aren't talked about. It's just taken as if this is how consent has to look. No other further qualifications. I think what this conversation is really geared towards is when people don't really know each other that well, you know, maybe it's their first handful of sexual experiences with each other, when they're kind of learning each other's body language, when there may be that ambiguity of not knowing, does this person want what I'm doing? Does this person also want to have sex with me? Do they want to have this intimate experience? Yes, obviously. It would be such a big relief to be able to hear your partner say, yes, absolutely, I want this to happen. But the reality of relationships are, probably not surprisingly, a little bit more complicated than that. When you are in a relationship with an asexual person, when you are in an ongoing long-term relationship of any kind, when you are in a BDSM relationship, the role that enthusiastic consent has to play into that gets a little bit murky, shall we say. And so yes, if it was me, if I had somebody ask me how they should handle consent when they are going to a party and they might hook up with somebody they don't really know that well, I think enthusiastic consent in those situations should be the framework, because it is the most unambiguous way of obtaining consent that there is, and I think that is the benefit. But because there is a lack of nuance in this conversation, at least the takeaway I have gotten in any discussion of this I've had is that this is how consent should always be in all circumstances. And when you are somebody like me and you are asexual, if you are in a long-term romantic relationship with somebody, sex may still be part of that experience. You may not be enthusiastic about the act of sex itself, but you may still want to have sex with your partner for various reasons, you know, making them feel happy, having a bonding opportunity with your partner. Maybe you want to have kids, you know? Maybe the act of sex itself is not your favorite thing ever, you know? It's like not having your favorite food, right? Maybe pizza is a 10 out of 10. Yes, absolutely favorite food. Having a Caesar salad is like, take it or leave it. 5 out of 10, 4 out of 10, you know, I'm not going to vomit if I eat it, but like it's not my favorite. I think if we're expecting all sex all the time to always be a 10 out of 10, instead of like a 6 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10 with somebody that you otherwise have a really established relationship with, we are kind of setting people up to miss out on a lot of experiences, and of course, erase the ace experience altogether. And I'm not trying to say that all asexual people should feel like they have to have sex with their partners or that they should be okay with it. Like being a sex repulsed asexual person who never wants to have sex or even look at anybody's genitals, great, perfect, super, super valid. But I am personally on the kind of spectrum of being ace where like I am okay with having sex sometimes with my partners. I'm okay with that being part of what we do. It's not a 10 out of 10 for me. It's not pizza, but like it's not making my life worse when I do it. I'm not staying up late at night thinking about how awful it is. It's part of something that makes my partner happy that I'm willing to do for them because of how happy it makes them. You know, it's part of the give and take of having a long-term ongoing adult relationship. And so I think we have to be mindful of that experience. And I think we have to also be mindful of how maybe this plays into thinking about BDSM as well, right? Because that is the primary thing that I talk about on my channel is BDSM. You know, hi, hello, if you don't know who I am, I talk about BDSM, that's kind of my thing. And I think if you are maybe in a pickup play situation, that is a good analogy for sort of the hookup culture thing I talked about earlier, where like, yeah, enthusiastic consent, a hell yes, is probably good to have in that situation because you want to have an unambiguous yes with people you don't really know that well in an unfamiliar setting where that ambiguity can result in some very negative consequences. However, when you are in a long-term ongoing BDSM relationship, you may play with things like consensual non-consent. You may be willing to do things that you don't personally enjoy to make your partner happy for the sake of the power exchange. It is something you consent to. It's something you negotiate for. It's something you want to have happen, but the act itself may not be something that you personally get a lot of hell yes enjoyment out of. And I think having this general standard, regardless of it's BDSM or not, if the person's asexual or anything else, but again, having it be that standard of like everything must be hell yes all the time is just like, I don't know what kind of sex you guys are having. Maybe I'm just totally missing out on something here, but is all sex always a 10 out of 10 hell yes experience? Or do we sometimes make compromise with our partners because like having sex would be very beneficial for their mood or help them with their period cramps or something else, you know, where we're willing to kind of do it because of what it does for our partners rather than what it does for ourselves. And so when it comes to BDSM, I think thinking about enthusiastic consent, again, good for pick-up play, good for newer partners, but when you are thinking about something more long-term, something more established, then like part of having a power exchange dynamic can look like it not being enthusiastic. It can look like somebody not really enjoying what's happening to them directly, but getting kind of this convoluted sort of secondary fun out of the fact that they're being forced to do something they don't really enjoy, and so they kind of enjoy it anyways because it's this weird feedback loop that unless you've been in it before is hard to describe, where you were just doing something that you personally are not like super into, but because your partner's really into it and because you're being like forced to do it, that's the part of it that's hot. And this can be consent to a sexual activity, this can be consent to a scene, this can be consent to a particular type of play, right? You know, like maybe you really, really, really hate canes, for example, and caning is like, oh, I don't like it. It's a soft limit, but it's not a hard no, right? And I think what we have to consider when we are talking about enthusiastic consent is that's not the only tool that we have to make sure the consent for the things that we are doing are robust. With BDSM relationships, we potentially have months of ongoing negotiation with a partner, of a well-established and tested framework of knowing in detail, these are the things that my partner enjoys under these circumstances. These things are the things that they really, really love. These things like okay, sometimes maybe is fine. These the absolute never, ever, ever don't even talk to me about that thing, right? And when you have had the opportunity to go into that kind of detail about everything in the relationship, then having enthusiasm be the requirement is something that I don't really necessarily know if it's as useful as it could be. And then I think people talk about it like it is, you know? And so I want people to feel like they have permission to engage in the kinds of sex that they want to have and the kinds of BDSM relationships that they want to have, even when that doesn't necessarily always look like enthusiastic consent at all times, in all situations, because of the nuance that can be there, that can be present, that makes it maybe less dangerous than it might seem from the outside. And what I think would be a better model that really gets to the same heart as enthusiastic consent is affirmative consent. And with affirmative consent, I think there is still that same desire, that same goal of having it be engaged, of having it be present, of having it be uninebriated, of having it be uncoerced, and saying, yes, I want to do this thing. I am present. I am here in this moment. I am saying yes to this. But rather than having it be this like super high level, hell yes, your whole body is into it kind of thing, it's like, yeah, I'm into it. I'm aware of everything that's going to happen and I want it to happen, but I'm not going to be into it as much as you are. Or I'm okay with this, but it's not my favorite thing ever. Or I'm doing it because it makes you happy, but like it's not really doing anything for me personally. So it's allowing more gradation, and what we're kind of saying is okay for people to say okay to. You know, and I think it's important that we acknowledge other people's autonomy over their own bodies, that we acknowledge that people can choose to engage in things that maybe we wouldn't choose to engage in for ourselves. And I think it does the job of still wanting to minimize abuse, minimize coerced sex, minimize violence against others, but it's not doing it in a way where we're setting this really, really high bar for all situations without any kind of nuance whatsoever. And as well, I think with affirmative consent, you still have that duty to check in with your partner's physical and emotional cues, to check in with them verbally to make sure that they're still okay with everything going on. And that doesn't get replaced just because it's not enthusiastic consent in particular. Being able to check in with your partner is super, super important. And to be able to say, hey, is everything still going okay? If there's any sort of doubt or ambiguity at all, checking in, I think, should always be the first step. And if there's any doubt at all, I think it is perfectly okay to stop what is happening, have a little moment, and then if you want to, decide to go back into it or decide to stop, right? Because consent also goes both ways. While somebody might be okay consenting at a lower level of enthusiasm, if you are somebody that wants and expects enthusiastic consent as the bare minimum, that is okay. If that kind of ambiguity makes you uncomfortable and you say, hey, you know, I'm not really totally confident that you're into what I'm doing, so I'm going to stop because that is what I need in order to feel comfortable going forward, I think that is great. You should absolutely be able to do that, to establish your boundaries in that way, and to be able to find people that are comfortable kind of playing in whatever realm of consent that you want to play in. And I do think enthusiastic consent can be really important. I think it can be something that is super helpful for navigating those potentially uncertain waters with new partners and not really knowing if what you're doing is okay or not. It does definitely have its downfalls, and so I would maybe encourage you, if you like enthusiastic consent, to maybe consider some of the things I've said here in this video. And so I do really like affirmative consent as a better framing of what I think is a very, very similar, if not identical idea, just with, again, that more room for a gray area about what consent looks like in your individual relationship. And again, I'm not trying to say that enthusiastic consent is bad or it shouldn't exist or nobody should ever use it and it's useless, like nothing like that. I think there are many circumstances under which enthusiastic consent is very useful, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge the areas where it's less useful, in which another way of thinking about this could be more beneficial. So that's everything I have to say about enthusiastic consent. If you guys have any of your own thoughts, comments, experiences, anything else you want to go ahead, leave that down in the comment section below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you really enjoy what I do, if you want to support my work, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. A link to that is down in the description box below. It allows me to do all this work here on this channel, but also allows me to offer you guys extra bonus perks and rewards, things like Discord, extra videos, photo shoots every month, and so on. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and check that out. Again, link is down there. If you already support me over there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.